to another episode of Roll for Origin, Super's TTRPG History. This is where I, Lowell, pronouns he, him, and Jay are going to be talking about different Super's RPGs, what they are, what their context is for gaming, what their context is for the history of comics, and then our general impression. So, Jay, V&V, you played this.
I did. It was my first Supers game before Champions. So I have the box set. I still have that. So it came with the core rules, the counters that you cut out and stand them up,
Mm-hmm.
the Crisis at Crusader Citadel.
Yeah.
I remember, so knowing that this was going to be our next podcast, I ran through looking at, and again, in my head, I'm like, I don't know what we were doing as kids. Surely we didn't run combat the way it's laid out in the book, right? Did we play this way? What I know for sure is, as kids, again, I'm like sixth grade, seventh grade,
Mm-hmm.
and we're like, I don't want to make a character that's a kid, right? We want to be adults, right? And so I remember it had another way. You didn't have to make yourself, but that's what we did. We didn't want to play
Oh,
ourselves.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We I played a lot of first edition and second edition, well, revised edition, V&V, when it became the go-to game for the crowd, and then Champions took over. And
Right,
then even like up through high school and college, if people didn't want to do Champions, they would pull out V&V to do
right.
lighter supers. So yeah, yeah.
And that's crazy to me, right? We get into these conversations, and in my head, Champions is heavy on the front end, right? Building the characters. Once we're playing traditional type 3d6 roll under kind of stuff,
Hmm.
right? But V&V is the other way, right? It's kind of easy running through the tables making your character, but actual play, rules as written, which I'm convinced that's not what we did. It's some work.
I will say this before we get into, and I'll talk about the pitch in a moment. Buried deep in the combat section, after all of these other explanations, do they finally say, and this is the die you roll? They've told you all these modifiers, all these numbers. It's only then. So it's wild. So, what is Villains Vigilantes? Villains Vigilantes was an all in one superhero TTRPG. It was written by Jeff D. and Jack Herman. It was released by Fantasy Games Unlimited back in 1979. And it did well enough that they did a revised edition in 1981, as Jay mentioned, as a box set. And a little bit later, they released the core book separately. That later revised edition lasted for a very long time. And there were modules up until sort of the late 80s. And then there's a break. And then once digital comes out, we get more modules there. So, as Jay mentioned, also, Villains and Vigilantes is unusual for an RPG because you are asked to play yourself, but with randomly determined superpowers. Like, it makes a big point in both editions that this is what you need to do. You should absolutely do this. If
Right.
you die in game, maybe then you can make up another one, but it's really wild. What that means in practice is they want you to have the GM evaluate you and assign you real world stats. Then you roll a random origin, and that in turn determines a table or tables that you roll on for powers. It's a little bit different in the two editions and the number of powers that you get. You're supposed to then, after you've rolled these powers, drop any which don't fit. In the second edition, they actually require you to drop one. And then the GM can come in and say, yeah, I don't think you should have this power. It's very, very arbitrary. The game has a big list of powers.
Hmm.
Unlike Superhero 2044, it actually has powers broken into different categories, a little bit different setup between the two versions. And then there's also personal disadvantages that you can roll. So you can roll something bad on there. V&V definitely takes its cues, has the vibe of both X-Men of the period and Legion of
Right.
Superheroes. You could, I think, pretty easily roll up most characters from those comics. You can also, though, see the influence of other games. For example, in the first edition, polymorph others is a power, and you have to take your magic system from another fantasy RPG. They
Right.
changed that in the revised edition. The powers are description, not effect-based. Description-based games usually start with an overall concept of a power, bundle them together about what it does, and give it some trappings and special effects. On the other hand, effect-based games like Champions and Mutants Masterminds third edition, they provide a toolbox of effects that can be modified with advantages, limitations,
Right.
descriptors, all of those kinds of things. Instead, you roll a power. There are often some choices that you make within the power. Maybe there's some random things you roll, like, for example, I think android body and
Right. Right.
armor. And because this is one of the earliest super system, the game has wildly unbalanced powers.
But I like that because you end up with this ragtag group, right? It's unbalanced, but yeah.
Yeah, but some are clearly more potent and useful than others. And in both versions, the rules write-ups differ significantly in how detailed they are. For example, weather control gets all of these discussions about all the things that you can do with it and a chart for moving the weather, where others are the GM makes it up. If you have animal or plant powers in the first edition, the GM just makes it up. Again, the revised edition cleans a lot of that up, but there's still some gaps.
Right. Right.
This is also an early TTRPG, so the core mechanics are very number heavy. Lots of modifiers based on stats, modifiers for different situations, special mods for different powers. A lot of these feel incredibly arbitrary. It's not like there's a logic to why we're taking these minuses and penalties. That means that combat is a little wild across versions. The first edition, this is the killer for me. The first edition has a table that is 32 by 46, and that's attack types cross-referenced with defense types. And when you make an attack, you find out what the attack type is, and then figure out all the possible defenses against it up to 5. And there are numbers there, and you add up those 5 numbers. You get this number together. You then also have a host of other mods for position, range, level difference, stats, all those things. And that's the number you have to roll under to hit on percentiles. The revised version abbreviates that table. It's only 17 attacks by 26 defenses. It's just one lookup. You've got your cross reference,
Right.
you've got a number, you've got your THACO, and you roll a d20 and you look under that.
That is what I remember. Yeah.
Yeah. The combat definitely has a tactical skirmish feel. It suggests using counters, which we'll probably come back to talk about those, because, of course, if you have to have facing, you've got to do measurements. And as well, there's a bunch of variable modifiers. One of the things that's interesting is that character levels make a big difference. You don't get new powers when you level up, even enhance your powers, but your character's level compared to the opponent's level makes a big difference in your hit roll. That's a problem later on because there are random encounter tables where you can fight somebody who is well above your level and you will never hit them.
Right.
One other thing, it's a system that really shows where supers start is this idea of power potential. So each use of a power costs a certain amount of power potential, or PP, based on your stats. If you have devices, those have a number of uses or their own pool, and it's a limitation. Like, you've got to recover that. Champions will do it more formally with endurance later, but it's a significant limiting factor as opposed to spell slots or times per day or anything like that. It is something that we'll see in other games, and I think is really, really interesting. So tell us about the context of this in gaming.
Gaming history, yes. So in the revised version, Jack Herman mentions reading and playing Monsters, Metamorphosis Alpha, Unguard, which I still like today.
Oh, yeah.
The original Traveler and Boot Hill. Notably absent from this list is D&D, right? In particular, he mentions Empire of the Petal Throne as a shared source between him and Jeff D. This is well before it came to light how much of Aryan supremacist EPT's designer Barker was. Oh my goodness, that's a whole nother podcast.
Oh, yeah.
I came late to that party. I had no idea till very, very late. I didn't know.
Yeah, no.
D mentions using the proto rules based on EPT to carry out super skirmishes, open combats, which would become a thing with Champions later. That's a very different concept than Superhero 2044's parallel play. V&V's first edition came right out the gate, much more like the role-playing games we've come to accept than Superhero 2044. And a lot changed in those 2 years in how people see tabletop role-playing games. There's a shift to the more classic dungeon master role, groups of adventurers, and playing together at a table. The D&D basic set, Top Secret, which I loved back then, and Gamma World, all represent a kind of mainstreaming approach to tabletop role-playing games with various versions of dungeon crawling. About the same time, other companies began to offer new templates for play and design. Star Trek, Adventure Gaming in the New Frontier, Bushido, and Gangster, both that I had, but never got to the table. Fantasy Games Unlimited, aka FGU, would have a ton of really interesting and often complex tabletop role-playing games. Through 1981 and the release of the revised version of V&V, they also put out Aftermath, Merc, Bushido, Bunnies and Burrows, Space Opera, Chivalry and Sorcery, Land of the Rising Sun, Skull and Crossbones, Wild West, Starships and Spacemen, Gangster, and Flash Gordon and the Warriors of Mongo. Some of these would be supported, others would die on the vine. The revised edition of V&V really broke through for FGU. They released it as a box set first, and then a single book about a year later. The former came with the book, a cardstock character sheet, and that module Crisis at Crusader Citadel. The first edition got some supplements, the classic Island of Dr. Apocalypse, and Death Duel with the Destroyers. The latter notably mentions that this has been designed to be fully playable with either the original V&V rules or the new improved edition, which is soon to be released. This way we can sell you the scenario now before the new rules come out, but still give you a taste of them so you'll buy those as well. Jeff D. and future Fable creator Bill Willingham's art really sold these releases. I remember that art, and that art is...
Oh, yeah.
It's still, to me... And maybe it's nostalgia, but it still grabs me, right?
It grabs me. It's iconic.
Yeah.
Across the board, yeah.
FGU would continue to release modules and enemies books for decades to come. The break in 1987, and then they resume again in 2004. While V&V dominated for a while, two other releases really split the market. Champions 1981, and then Marvel in 1984. You also had Chaosium's Superworld in 1982, and Palladium's Heroes Unlimited in 1985, as also rans throughout the 1980s. I mean, that's funny because that's exactly how I saw those other ones, right?
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
like, that's cool. That's a cool cover. Maybe I can steal some stuff out of here and put it in Marvel or put it in my Champions game. And that's terrible. But yeah, that's about the way that was. While we won't dwell on it, eventually there was a long-running legal battle over the ownership rights of Villains and Vigilantes. Living Legends was released in 2005 by Jeff D. with a completely new system, but the old V&V setting. Later, Mighty Protectors was released in 2017, following a Kickstarter as V&V 3.0. This notably has both D and Herman listed as designers.
So, in terms of where V&V takes place in comics history, here we are again, 1981. We're not that long after 2024. And so a lot of the same influences are present. And in the introduction to the Villains Vigilantes reprint, Jack Herman specifically mentions Frank Miller's debut on Daredevil around that time. And in parallel with that, we've got John Byrne and Chris Claremont's X-Men run, which is really starting to hit its stride. We've moved out of Cockrum into Byrne. We've got George Perez's run on the Avengers, which set an incredibly high bar for art and story. One of the interesting things we saw was Byrne's final days on the X-Men books, where we got the Dark Phoenix saga and Days of Future Past, and then great stuff. And then Byrne would move over to Fantastic Four in 81, where he did my favorite run on the FF. I think that's a great and overlooked series, but some real changes to modern comics. Marvel was trying to embrace some weirdness with books like Defenders, Howard the Duck, the introduction of Spider-Woman, and Champions, but remained a lot more conventional. Something I mentioned when we talked about Superhero 2044, DC had a real crash with the DC implosion. They did a bunch of experimental titles. They were trying to kind of catch the energy that Marvel had, but there's still that split. That would
Right.
last until we get, just in that early 80s, we get George Perez and Marv Wolfman on New Teen Titans, that
Yeah,
amazing,
that was amazing.
amazing run. And then Keith Giffen's run on Legion of Superheroes, which would culminate in his Dark Side saga,
Right.
which is so good. But a real shifting there. We are also seeing in the background a rise of indie comics, of specialty comic book stores, and the direct market. For example, they start looking at that more seriously when they do Dazzler #1, and it's sold for specifically for comic book shops. And it sells 400,000 copies.
That's crazy.
It's wild.
That's crazy. Yeah.
In terms of other media, around this time we have the Superman 1 and 2 films, but otherwise any superhero films were very low budget. The Captain America, Doctor Strange, Condor Man. There's a lot of sci-fi films going on around that time. Black Hole, Empire Strikes Back, Time Bandits even. So there is some of that, but boy, the superhero stuff is very, very retro. That holds true in terms of television. We have some live action superhero shows, Wonder Woman, Spider-Man, Incredible Hulk.
Hmm.
Animated stuff, we got a few of those, but they're all very much one season unless you're the Super Friends, and then you get multiple seasons.
I remember the Super
Saturday
Friends.
morning, I would get up and
Yep.
watch them every
Along
time.
with the PSAs in the middle of them.
Yep.
Yes.
And they would change the approach of the show.
Yeah.
So okay, now we don't have the kids with us. Now what's going on? And now we've got a bunch of international heroes, and now
Right.
Darkseid's here. What is going
Right.
on?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Uh,
Nostalgia.
so thoughts. Let's open it up to things we want to talk about regarding Villains Vigilantes.
Yeah, for me, I think the wargaming aspect was easy for me to get into, right? I was messing around with a lot of different boxed war games at the time. And so jumping into cross-referencing tables, facing front and back, tactical movement on the table, measuring things out was kind of second nature. That was easy for me. So I ran that game
Mm-hmm.
after school and stuff like that at the library, things like that. I'm not gonna lie, I don't know. Maybe we played it rules as written. The fun parts were making up the characters, right?
Yeah.
And as wild as they could be, I think we played through everything we could up to combat, and I can't remember how we managed the combat looking at the rules today. But I don't know that I would have been a stranger to it, again,
Right.
having a little bit of wargaming background to me. I don't think I was scared by it, but I don't know that I ran it that way.
Yeah, I remember playing it, and I think there was a lot of kind of hand waving. I think we pretty much cross-referenced the chart, and then we didn't check any other numbers. And that gave us the number to roll under. That's what I remember of it. It is interesting what you say, because there is that real pleasure to just rolling up a character, to seeing what you get,
Right.
to generating those numbers. That, like, I love Champions, but Champions is,
Right.
now I got to sit down and build that character. There's
Right.
no, let's roll it up, let's see what we get.
No.
It's so much more intentional. You can't really just futz around like you
No.
can with that.
I think the thing that stood out for me, and I still remember, and even after this podcast, I'm going to break that book open because I want to know for sure. I want to remember for sure. I think it had a weird initiative, like a step or timing initiative system.
15
right?
points.
Yes.
You roll your agility plus a d10. If you have super speed or some of the other things,
Right.
that will add to that. And of course, you roll initiative every turn.
Right.
Maddening. But you go every 15 ticks. So
Right.
if
Right.
you roll a 40, you're going on 40, 25, and 10.
Right. Right. And if you end up low, like 15, right? That's it, right?
That's it. You are waiting around for everybody to do their actions. They're going to get multiple actions before you go.
Right.
So it was the first of the speed kills
Right.
RPGs, something we would see with Storyteller and Scion and all the things. Oh, you better have
Yeah.
your speed stat, your dex stat
That's
up
right.
real high.
Right. Or you're dead. It's over. Yeah, I remember that. I remember that had an impact on me, sixth, seventh grade. My mind was kind of blown open. I'm like, oh wow, this is fantastic. I was in love with it.
Uh-huh.
And so, and that's why like I said, I'm kind of mixed. I don't remember if we ran it straight, but there were pieces like that that I knew I was fascinated with. I would have wanted to get those on the table, so I don't know.
You mentioned the counters, and I think the counters are really striking because they're in the box set, and then in a lot of the modules, you had either staple-in inserts or the
Right,
back panel
right,
were these counters, and there was all this wonderful Jeff D art
yes,
that was across the board. You got all these counters, and they had different colorings and different sizes for things, and they were really striking. I never used them because I never wanted to cut up any of the books like
right. I
that.
didn't want to cut them up.
So that was hard. I remember this because this is about the same time as Jeff D is doing these and Dennis Lubert for Steve Jackson Games is doing Cardboard Heroes, which are those stand-up
Right,
ones.
right.
And for me, D and Lubert really define a whole kind of game art that I absolutely adore. And looking back at the Jeff D art in both books, they're great.
Yeah,
It's
they are
it's
great.
it's dynamite.
Yeah, no, those are very iconic. Yeah, you spot his stuff immediately. So I don't, was combat much different in the first edition? To me, I didn't realize there was a first edition till we started this podcast. I always thought my box set was it.
It's just more complicated. Like it is literally we go from having to calculate 5 lookups to 1 lookup and rolling percentiles to rolling a d20. That's the big change. Otherwise, a lot of the things are the same. It does mean that it scales down nicely the chances of, like, if you miss, you have to roll to see if you hit somebody else. There's that is a
Right.
factor.
And that's straight out of war games,
Yeah.
right? Right.
Well, and the idea that you take whatever hit point damage you've taken, and after you've taken hit, and I never remember doing this, that you roll to see if you got knocked out. So if you got hit for 10 points, you had a 10% chance of getting knocked out. I just saw this in the book and I'm like, I do not remember ever rolling for
Right.
consciousness
Right.
in here. And it's another one of those things like having to look up where it says you actually roll a d20, where there's so much stuff buried and never repeated in the rules.
Right.
Like that appears in one place. And the only reason I had to look it up was because I saw it mentioned under Android body power. You have to make a different roll for them for unconsciousness.
That is nuts.
Looking back at the game, thoughts about what you liked from it?
For sure. So, as the GM, you would have that lonely fun, right? You're making villains. Man, I don't even know how many different. I had a binder full of
Oh, yeah.
this stuff, right? So, one of the things I'd end up doing is making different villains. And then you're making villain teams, right? And then putting ideas or scenarios together for the next time we got together to play. But so my group was kind of weird. I wouldn't say weird, non-standard. There were 3 girls in the group and 3 guys, right? And we played most of everything, including Champions and V&V. And so we ended up with, and I only bring that out because I don't know if having the girls in the group changed the dynamics. Would we have been different otherwise, right?
Yes, I'm going to tell you right now. Yes, and I have a very specific example for this. But go on.
We had a lot of role-playing stuff, non-combat stuff going on, and everybody was engaged. It wasn't poo-pooed or, right? It was a team effort at the table. So there was relationships type stuff going on, family stuff going on, there were heist things going on, right? All the kind of non-combat stuff from game to game to game. So every game wasn't knockdown, drag out kind of fight, right? Even like going to dungeons wasn't just, I just got to get the gold, kill the dragon, get out of here. It was layered in other stuff that we didn't poo-poo, everybody was in. And that was normal for me. So V&V, Villains Vigilantes, felt like any Spider-Man comic book from the time. He's dealing with his family stuff. He's just trying to get through school, and there's shockers showing up, messing up his day. And now I got to go do this thing because I got to be responsible, not because I want to bash Shocker's head in or anything like that. So yeah, it was different that way.
For me, around that sort of same age bracket, grade school, middle school, high school play, I had groups of guys, maybe one girl from time to time. My sister, there were a few more women in the cohort that she was in, but they were like 5 years older than me.
Hmm.
But the group was very guy heavy. And it wasn't until like much later, after we played these supers for a long time, that they started to open up and do more role play and stuff because they've done the combats. It was like they got tired of that. So they finally, oh, maybe we should role play now. They poo-pooed Marvel when it came out because it was all that focus on those
Right,
kinds of RP stuff.
right.
But I'll tell you my story about this. When Mutants and Masterminds first edition came out, I wanted to run it. And Sherry, my wife, was interested in playing it. And we ended up with a table of 5 women. And I went to run it like I would run my usual Supers game. They did not play like any Supers table or any table I've ever played with. I have never seen more cooperation and careful planning and wanting to just get through the fight so they can get back to talking to NPCs and stuff. I was still very much in a very different mindset about how Supers games went, and
Right.
they completely swerved me every time. It
That
was
is
wild.
fascinating. Yeah, that is wild. That is wild. No, I think we were nerds enough, comic book wise. There's a lot of cross pollination between comics because we all like different things, and now we're talking together and we're sharing that. And it wasn't so much trying to play a specific comic, but I think we were after stealing the soap opera, the drama
Hmm.
that's in the comics, and getting that on the table and playing around with that. And however we got it to the table, I think it was about, and I always call it soap opera, right? Because it feels, I've watched a lot of soap operas with my grandma, feels a lot like that practical outrageousness that you
Hmm.
get from soap opera. How many times I got to kill this guy, right? Did we kill him 2 issues ago, right? And now here he is again. It's stuff like that and the dynamics and relationships between all the NPCs and players at the table in that period of time. By the time I got to the military, it was all guys, and we're just anything that's moving, we're trying to kill it. So, right.
Let's talk about some other things that happen in this game. One of the things that is a little bit like how Superhero 2044 did it and different than we would see later. A lot of the later games spend a lot of time giving us benchmarks for
Right.
how much can you lift, how fast can you move. In the first edition of V&V, there's almost no benchmarks beyond, okay, you have the strength of 10 men.
Right.
Well, what does that mean practically? The
Right.
second one, the revised one that we played, has you calculating carrying capacity in pounds. You generate this number, but okay, you can lift, 6,284 pounds. What does that mean? I have
What does
no
that
clue.
mean?
So there's a lot of that.
Yeah, and that I was gonna say that metrics thing, practical metrics, right? We're stronger than the average, so we need some other ways of measuring what can we lift? Can I pick up this plane? And I could see that happening, right? Am I stronger than the Hulk? Things like that. I think DC heroes
Oh
may
yeah.
have the best at the table way where I could look at my strength. I could say I'm trying to lift this thing, and then I have a resulting number that lets me know how effective I am with that. And that number changes based on how heavy the thing is I'm trying to throw or how much strength I have. I think everywhere else, it comes up either too much math to be messing around with
Hmm.
and not practical at the table.
Yeah.
So I think here it's the early version of realizing it's not enough to have these numbers and stats. Folks are going to be able to do things with them, but I don't know what they're going to want to do with them and how to help them with that.
Yeah.
Money is the same way, right? Because we got
Hmm.
rich superheroes. What do we, how do I get that in the game? What does that look like? What do you do with that? And you always get that knucklehead player. Well, I'm rich, so I'm just going to buy this thing and solve this problem.
And they have a little bit of that talking about it in V&V, where they spend some time talking about being a superhero, but it's very hand wavy still. They mention merchandising.
Right.
as a thing that
Right.
you can do and give you some cash off of that, which is kind of wild. There isn't a super wealth power
Right.
in there like Batman has. Some things that I like from V&V. One, we have a lot of random event tables. I love random event tables, like random patrol tables, those kinds of things. And there's the whole big thing in the editions of, okay, let's roll for random tables, let's do the fight, let's resolve this, and then let's roll to see if they get convicted.
Right. Right.
And this whole big mechanic there, which I love the idea of, we've got a charisma stat that we used and goes up when we solve crimes, and villains dislike us when we do that. And that's all tied into that whole crime and criminology and conviction thing. Though it does feel a little weird to have a whole procedure that you have to track out of whether the guy that you busted for the bank robbery actually gets convicted or if he gets off on a technicality.
Right. Right.
And it's compounded that in the second book, it's a 48-page book, 48 page, 8.5 by 11 book. And in that revised edition, 6 full pages are dedicated to breaking down the criminal justice system, the
Wow.
list of crimes, and that system for criminal trials. Like, this is not something that you would dwell on in the comics.
No.
And we've got this whole procedure. It made me wonder if he mentioned Miller's run on Daredevil.
I was going to
I,
mention Daredevil.
I wonder if that was part of it because there was a lot of that storyline that was hot at that time that dwelled with criminals getting off
Right.
or having to deal with the trials and things.
No, that's interesting. No, you're right, and I forget about that whole legal system in V and V. I don't know that we get to see anything to that depth later on in other games. I think they nail it there, and we never see it revisited. Inventing, being able to invent things in
Yeah.
games. I think there are, yeah. I think they take a swing at it in here too with inventing points. I like when superhero games include some mechanism for that. Because again, that's fun, lonely fun, building new things, inventing new things, if you're into that kind of hero. So,
And I like that it's not like, okay, if you're a tech hero, you get these inventing things.
right,
Anybody can have them.
right,
And that's a really overlooked, nice valve for developing because you're not getting new powers.
right.
You're not really changing your stats except by like spend 100 hours training or whatever. So having that as a nice option to get a one-shot ability, do a thing to represent it. I would have liked a little more talk about like how do you do that on the fly,
Right.
but that's probably a little bit more ahead of the time.
Yeah, and I don't know because I didn't grab all the adventure scenario books, and they could have easily packed extra
Oh
rules
yeah,
in some of the other books. I didn't grab them all.
it's some of the first superhero monster books. So we've got,
Right.
I think, what Villains Assembled, I think, or I can't
Yes.
remember what it's
Yes.
called. There's collections of those. That would be the big thing for Champions for me, all of those books.
Oh my goodness.
And I cannot describe how much the Island of Dr. Apocalypse and Death Duel Destroyers,
Yeah.
like how much those live in my head. That Willingham art is so good and it's so striking. And it's not just there's great art that's really colorful, it's that they've got these little comic vignettes inside. They're really cool villains. They've got a lot of depth to them. I played a lot with Gene Ha, who in comics,
Right.
and he loved those and he would remix those modules to do all kinds of things. Like he was absolutely into it. Champions was not his jam. V&V definitely was. And that was, God, those books are amazing. And it's like people talk about with D&D, the modules that they remember, the Isle of Dread,
Right. The Isle of Dread.
or Temple of Elemental Evil or whatever.
Right.
None of that for me, but these two modules definitely.
Wow.
Like
All
those
right.
were the ones we played. Those were the ones I read over and over again.
I'm trying to remember. I remember the Crisis at Crusader Citadel because that for me is what do I do with this game? I know comic books, but how do I make it manifest at the table? I think a lot of the stuff we used the random event tables and then built stories or premises around those and ran with that. The champion stuff for sure. I've got a ton of,
Yeah.
right? their monster manuals.
We will come back to it, but wow, enemies one, two, and
Yes.
three, and Island of Doctor Destroyer.
Yeah, yeah.
No, is it? See, here's the thing: is that it's Doctor Apocalypse for this one, it's Doctor Destroyer for
For
Champions, and I get
champions,
them
yeah.
mixed up.
Yeah.
But yeah, I loved those so
And then you've
much.
got like superbook organizations like Viper until Clown, right? I'm
Yeah,
like, oh, so
and for me, those stuck from Champions. The V
right,
and V ones, I couldn't name. I know they have them, but I couldn't
right.
name you an
They do, and I
organization.
just, yeah, I can't. I don't have it. Yeah.
I don't know why that is. Anything else you want to say about V and V that's interesting, the superhero gaming around this time?
I think for me, villains and vigilantes. I don't know if I had to pick, right? It's villains and vigilantes that gets me off of the fantasy D&D path and more into sci-fi supers gaming. I think that's the first game that made me realize I can do more than just fantasy stuff. And it just gets crazier. If we're doing superhero stuff now with this, I think Traveler was the next game I played. And then I never went back. Most
Hmm.
of the gaming I did from there on was like sci-fi type stuff, super stuff. So Villains and Vigilantes opened that door for me. And it would be a while before I got back to a D&D game.
Oh yeah. It was definitely that for me. And then from that point forward, for a very long time, we played some form of supers, either this or
Mm-hmm.
champions, and sometimes some weird flavor of champions, like we play Danger International, but it was
Yeah,
really
yeah.
just champions.
Right.
And then because of a weird set of things in our local group, we didn't go to D&D, we went to Rollmaster and we played that for a very long time until and no sci-fi really until cyberpunk.
Okay.
So
Okay.
so that's that kind of evolution for me. But I really love it's so wild to go back and look at this. I was thinking about this in terms of another idea here, and this is very tangential, but it struck me. I love those counters and I love those stand-up cardboard counters.
Right.
And there were companies that tried to make miniatures at the time. But the problem is, and why you can't do that versus fantasy, is those costumes are so distinctive that nobody wanted to buy something that didn't quite look like
Right.
their thing. So you get these weird generic, not very good minis. And it's so crazy to me because of course now I've got boxes and boxes of HeroClix.
Right.
And I just downloaded a bunch of STLs for the DC miniatures game, and I can 3D print those
Right.
and stuff.
Right.
We still don't have generic supers, but boy,
That's
we can
right.
do just about anybody from the real world there. I say
No,
the
that's a
real
good
world
point.
from superhero comics.
No, that's the MCU makes it real.
Yeah.
No, you're right. That's a good point.
Well, I think then we've done Villains and Vigilantes. This is another dense game. 48
Yeah.
pages,
Yeah.
tiny type, so much covered in this. It's interesting to see both the economy of how they're doing it and also how complicated they can still make it with so little space.
Right. Inside of 48 pages. Right.
Yeah.
This is a game, again, I would love to get it back to the table for a short run. Rules is written. See what
Hmm.
we got. This might be a game I would put a disclaimer up front. Normally, if I'm going to get into a game, let's play 3 or 4 sessions, see how it goes. If we're feeling it, we'll tack on another 2, and we call it 6 and it's done. This would be a game I would say, let's do 2 for sure, right? Let's try to get 3, but if you're done at 2, I'm not going to be mad. And that's because I think the lookups and the combat could grate on people
Yeah.
and they would want to tap out. And I wouldn't want to make them go through 4 sessions. But I would want to get it to the table.
So, listeners, that's our show. We will have links in the show notes to some of the sources. And Jay, is there anything you want to plug or anything you want to mention here?
I'm just Jay. I run the Play Fearless newsletter. I just went over 100 Mondays. So
Yeah.
come check it out. Yeah.
And you're talking about going back and doing some more AP in the future here?
Yeah, so I think for sure I've been dogfooding my Mad Dice app. And that turned into getting back on Twitch with the actual play crew. So we'll run Cyber Plus Punk for like 3 or 4 sessions in June, Sundays. That will happen for sure.
Excellent.
I think you lit the fire for me with this podcast. I've got a short list of games, super games that I want to play, and I think we'll just do it and do a podcast. We won't stream it. I think I'd want to get, like I said, 4 to 6 sessions per game.
Yeah.
And then kind of talk about it after the fact and just play through those. So those
Absolutely.
are the two big things, that I'm thinking about. And of course, I've got to finish up Lifted Indomitable. It's in layout. We've got all the extra stuff like reference sheets, cards, all the extraneous, miscellaneous stuff, but the core book is in layout at the moment.
I'm excited to see that. I'm really looking forward to it. So
no, I'm happy. I'm sorry that it took so long, but there's a moment in that path, and I'll probably do a post about it. There's a moment in there when I realize we already have Marvel superheroes, and so I shouldn't try to make a Marvel Superheroes 2. And if it's Cortex and I stay inside the Cortex constraints, you could swap out the stuff that I've done that you don't like and put the Marvel stuff back in there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so once I was freed, the rest just kind of happened and rolled, and I'm happy with the game at the end. So
awesome. Well, we will be looking forward to that. Listeners, this show is a production of Open Hearth Gaming. You can find out more about that at openhearthgaming.com. I guess I'll make a plug that you should rate, review, share, all those kinds of things to get more attention to the feed. We would appreciate that. Thanks so much.